Florida just built a $1.4 billion facility that pulls 25 million gallons of salt water from the ocean every single day, removes the salt, and turns it into drinking water. It's the largest desalination plant in the Western Hemisphere. And what's happening there right now is either the solution to America's water crisis or the beginning of an environmental catastrophe that nobody saw coming. But here's the part that should worry you. This isn't a test. This isn't a pilot program. This is 25 million gallons per day, operational right now, serving 1.5 million people in Tampa Bay. And the waste product, hypersaline brine that's twice as salty as ocean water, is being pumped back into the Gulf of Mexico at a rate of 12 million gallons per day. That waste is about to create problems that engineers didn't fully account for. Let me tell you exactly what's happening in Tampa Bay, why this technology seemed like the perfect solution, and why marine biologists are starting to panic about what they're seeing in the water. Florida has a water problem that most people don't realize exists. You think Florida, and you picture water everywhere, beaches, lakes, the Everglades, constant rain. But here's the reality. Florida gets its drinking water from underground aquifers, and those aquifers are running dry. The Floridan aquifer, the primary freshwater source for 10 million people, is being drained faster than rain can refill it. Every year, the water level drops, contaminating wells. In some coastal areas, people turn on their taps, and the water tastes like the ocean because salt water has infiltrated the aquifer. By 2040, projections show Florida will need 2 billion gallons more water per day than current sources can provide. The population is exploding. 1,000 people move to Florida every single day. Agriculture uses massive amounts of water. The aquifers can't keep up. So in 2003, Tampa Bay Water, the utility serving the region, decided to do something radical. If the aquifer is being contaminated by salt water anyway, why not just use salt water directly? Build a massive desalination plant. Pull water from the ocean. Remove the salt. Problem solved. The technology exists. Reverse osmosis desalination works. You force seawater through membranes at high pressure. Salt molecules are too big to pass through. Fresh water comes out one side. Concentrated brine comes out the other. Middle Eastern countries have been doing this for decades. Tampa Bay built their plant. It cost $1.40 billion, 3 times the original budget. It took 15 years to build because the first contractor went bankrupt. But in 2008, it finally came online. The plant produces 25 million gallons of fresh drinking water every single day. But here's what nobody thought about carefully enough. What happens to the waste? For every 2 gallons of seawater that enters the Tampa Bay desalination plant, 1 gallon becomes drinking water and 1 gallon becomes hypersaline brine. This isn't slightly salty water. This is concentrated salt solution twice as salty as normal seawater. And they're pumping 14 million gallons of this stuff back into Tampa Bay every single day. The original plan seemed reasonable. The plant pulls water from the Big Bend Power Station, a natural gas power plant that uses seawater for cooling. The intake water is already warm from the cooling process. After desalination, the brine gets mixed back with the power plant's cooling water discharge, diluting it before it goes into the bay. Right. Wrong. Because that's 12 million gallons of extra salty water entering Tampa Bay's ecosystem daily. Mixed or not, and marine biologists are starting to document problems that the engineers didn't predict. Dr. James Childress, a marine biologist at the University of Florida, started noticing something strange in 2019. Seagrass beds near the outflow area were dying. Seagrass is the foundation of Tampa Bay's marine ecosystem. It provides habitat for fish, stabilizes sediment, and oxygenates water. Healthy Tampa Bay has extensive seagrass coverage. But in the areas near the desalination outflow, seagrass was turning brown and disappearing. He tested the water salinity. Normal seawater in Tampa Bay, 35 parts per thousand. Water near the outflow during discharge periods. 42 I-vol 45 parts per thousand. That's a 20 to 30% increase in salinity. Seagrass can tolerate slight salinity variations, but not sustain 20% increases. The plants were literally being pickled by the concentrated brine. But here's where it gets worse. The brine doesn't just increase salinity, it also carries the chemicals used in the desalination process. Anti-scaling agents to prevent mineral buildup in the membranes. Anti-foaming agents. PA adjusters. These compounds are industrial grade and designed to be effective at breaking down biological materials, which is great for cleaning membranes, but terrible for marine life. In 2021, a team from the Smithsonian Marine Station sampled water near the outflow and found chemical concentrations 10 times higher than background levels. These chemicals affect fish reproduction, disrupt shellfish development, and contaminate the food chain. And nobody's sure how to fix it because the plant can't just stop operating. 1.5 million people depend on that water now. The aquifer can't replace it. Tampa Bay is locked into this system, and the environmental consequences are just starting to emerge. In April 2022, something unprecedented happened in Tampa Bay. A massive fish kill. Tens of thousands of dead fish washing ashore over a 3-week period. Mullet, catfish, snook, even sharks. All dead. Florida Fish and Wildlife investigated. The official cause, red tide, a harmful algal bloom that produces toxins and depletes oxygen. Red tide happens naturally in the Gulf of Mexico. But here's what was strange. This red tide was localized almost entirely in the area surrounding the desalination plant's outflow. Dr. Childress ran the numbers. Red tide algae, Karenia brevis, thrives in specific conditions: warm water, high nutrient levels, and stable salinity. The desalination brine creates all three. The warm water from the power plant cooling system provides temperature. The chemicals in the brine provide nutrients, and the high salinity creates a stable density layer that prevents mixing, which means nutrients stay concentrated instead of dispersing. The plant accidentally created perfect conditions for toxic algae, and once the bloom started, it fed on itself. Dead fish decompose, releasing more nutrients. More nutrients feed more algae. More algae. The cycle continues. The 2022 fish kill lasted 3 weeks before the bloom finally dissipated. But it established something concerning. The desalination plant's discharge area is now a recurring red tide hotspot. Every summer, when water temperatures rise, the conditions are perfect for blooms. And every summer since 2022, Tampa Bay has experienced fish kills in the same area. Local fishermen are furious. The area near the plant used to be prime fishing ground: grouper, snapper, tarpon. Now they avoid it entirely because there's nothing to catch. The fish have moved to other parts of the bay where salinity and chemical levels are normal. Tourism operators are concerned. Beaches near the outflow area now regularly close due to red tide warnings. Hotels that marketed pristine Gulf waters are dealing with reviews, complaining about dead fish, smell, and discolored water. And here's the worst part. Tampa Bay's desalination plant was supposed to be the model for Florida's future. There are plans for 4 more plants along Florida's coast. Fort Myers is building one. Jacksonville is planning one. Miami is considering one. If Tampa Bay's environmental problems are replicated at each location, Florida's entire coastline could face recurring dead zones. A coalition of environmental groups filed a federal lawsuit against Tampa Bay Water and the EPA. The allegation: the desalination plant violates the Clean Water Act by discharging pollutants that harm marine ecosystems. Tampa Bay Water's defense is technically correct, but morally questionable. They argue that they're not discharging pollutants, they're discharging seawater that's been concentrated through a natural process. Salt isn't a pollutant, it's a natural component of seawater. The fact that it's more concentrated doesn't make it illegal. But here's the counter-argument from environmental attorneys: concentration matters. Salt is natural, but doubling the salinity of an ecosystem is ecosystem destruction, regardless of whether the substance is natural. If someone dumped 12 million gallons of fresh water into the ocean daily, that would harm marine life too, even though fresh water is natural. The case is currently in federal court. If the environmental groups win, Tampa Bay Water would be required to either shut down the plant or implement additional treatment for the brine discharge. Additional treatment would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, money the utility doesn't have. Shutting down the plant would create an immediate water crisis for 1.5 million people. There's no good option. Continue operating and accept environmental damage. Modify the system at enormous cost, or shut down and face a drinking water emergency. But here's what makes this a national issue, not just a Florida problem. The southwestern United States is facing the worst drought in 1,200 years. The Colorado River, which provides water to 40 million people, is running dry. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at historic lows. California, Arizona, and Nevada are all looking at desalination as the solution. If desalination plants cause the environmental problems Tampa Bay is experiencing, and if dozens of plants get built along the Pacific coast, the environmental damage would be catastrophic. The entire ecosystem of the eastern Pacific could be disrupted by hypersaline discharge zones, chemical pollution, and algal blooms. The stakes are enormous. Do we prioritize drinking water for growing populations and accept environmental consequences? Or do we limit growth and water consumption to protect marine ecosystems? There's no compromise that makes everyone happy. I contacted Tampa Bay Water for comment on the environmental concerns. Their public affairs director sent me a carefully worded statement. Tampa Bay Seawater Desalination Plant operates within all federal and state environmental permits. We continuously monitor water quality and have implemented multiple safeguards to minimize ecological impact. That's technically true and functionally meaningless. Operating within permits doesn't mean no environmental damage. It means the damage is legally permitted. And those permits were issued in 2003 based on environmental assessments that didn't account for long-term cumulative effects. But here's what sources inside the plant told me off the record. The operations team knows about the problems. Internal monitoring shows salinity spikes near the outflow. They've documented declining marine life diversity in the discharge area. They've measured chemical concentrations that exceed safe levels for sensitive species. They can't say this publicly because admitting environmental harm would expose the utility to liability and jeopardize the permits that allow them to operate. So the official position is everything's fine, while internal data shows measurable ecosystem degradation. And here's the mechanism nobody wants to discuss. The brine discharge creates a dense layer on the seafloor that doesn't mix well with normal seawater. Hypersaline water is heavier than normal seawater, so it sinks and spreads across the bottom. This creates what marine scientists call a brine pool, an area of seafloor with salinity so high that most organisms can't survive there. Tampa Bay now has a 2-square-mile brine pool on its seafloor, directly beneath the plant's outflow. Nothing lives there. It's essentially a dead zone created by the desalination process. Fish avoid it. Crabs can't survive in it. Even bacteria struggle in extreme salinity. The plant operators know this exists because their own monitoring detected it. But publicly acknowledging a 2-square-mile dead zone would be a PR disaster and could trigger regulatory action. So the official position remains minimal environmental impact. Here's the frustrating part. Technology exists to solve the brine problem. It's just expensive, and Tampa Bay Water doesn't want to spend the money. Option 1. Deep ocean discharge. Instead of releasing brine into the shallow bay, build a pipeline that carries it 10–15 miles offshore and releases it in deep water. The Gulf of Mexico at depth has much larger volume, better circulation, and higher salinity tolerance. The brine would dilute naturally before reaching sensitive coastal ecosystems. Cost $400, 600 million. Tampa Bay Water says they can't afford it. The plant is already over budget. Ratepayers can't absorb another massive cost increase. Option 2. Brine, crystallization. Instead of discharging liquid brine, evaporate it completely and extract solid salt. The salt can be sold commercially. The remaining water is fresh enough to discharge safely. Cost: $300, 500 million, plus operational costs. This technology exists, but requires massive amounts of energy. Florida's electricity costs are already high. Making desalination even more energy-intensive would drive water costs higher. Option 3. Zero liquid discharge. Evaporate absolutely everything. Recover both the fresh water and the solid minerals. No liquid waste at all. Cost $800 million to $1 billion. This is the most environmentally friendly option and also the most expensive. It would double or triple water costs for Tampa Bay residents. The utilities position is we can't afford any of these options. Ratepayers are already paying premium prices for desalinated water. Adding hundreds of millions in environmental mitigation would make water unaffordable. The environmental position is you can't put a price on ecosystem health. If desalination destroys marine habitats, it's not a sustainable solution regardless of cost. And here's where we're stuck. Nobody wants to pay for the real cost of environmental protection, but nobody wants to live with the consequences of not protecting it either. Tampa Bay's desalination plant isn't shutting down. The federal lawsuit will take years to resolve. Even if environmental groups win, the most likely outcome is modified permits with stricter monitoring requirements, not actual operational changes. Meanwhile, the damage continues. Every day, 12 million gallons of hypersaline brine enters Tampa Bay. Every summer, red tide blooms near the outflow. The brine pool on the seafloor grows slightly larger. The environmental cost accumulates slowly, which makes it easy to ignore, until suddenly it's impossible to reverse. And here's what keeps marine biologists up at night. Tampa Bay is the prototype. 4 more plants are planned for Florida. California is considering 12 plants along its coast. If the environmental problems seen in Tampa Bay are replicated across dozens of facilities, entire coastal ecosystems could be fundamentally altered within 20 years. We're not facing a hypothetical future problem. We're watching it happen right now in real time. The question isn't whether desalination causes environmental damage. Tampa Bay proves it does. The question is whether we're willing to pay the real cost to mitigate that damage, or whether we'll accept ecosystem destruction as the price of unlimited growth and water consumption. Florida started pumping millions of gallons of salt water from the ocean to solve a water crisis. They succeeded. 1.5 million people have reliable drinking water now, but they created a different crisis in the process, one that's playing out beneath the surface where most people can't see it. The result isn't just insane. It's a warning about what happens when we deploy technological solutions without fully understanding or fully paying for their environmental consequences. And that warning is currently being ignored by every other city and state planning to follow Tampa Bay's lead.